something that's pretty common for guitar players when they're learning how to bend the string is to have a lot of unwanted noise. And the reason why you hear a bunch of stuff you don't want to hear is because you're not muting the other strings properly. So I'm not going to get into much detail on how to do a bend on this, but I'm going to talk about how to mute strings in order to prevent a lot of excess noise from ringing out. So let's take a look at basically what it looks like if you're bending without muting anything and what it might sound like if you don't have everything muted properly. So I'm just going to be bending the 10th fret on the high E string here without any muting, and this is what it sounds like. Now with muting, so hopefully you can hear a difference there. So here, when I'm not muting, there's extra noise happening, so I'll do it without the mute again. I'll do it on some other strings as well, so you can get an even better idea. Now, bending these lower strings, it's, I think, a bit easier to mute those than the top three. But basically, what needs to, if you sound like if you're muting properly, so how do you do that? How do you start to mute things so you don't have all that excess noise? And if you're playing without distortion, you may get away with less muting. This whole idea of throwing on a lot of distortion to cover up your mistakes, I think, is quite incorrect. If you have a lot of distortion on, that means you're going to have quite a bit of preamp happening. What I mean by that is all your very quiet things, quiet sounds, different noises when you're like moving from string to string, basically the slightest vibration of one of your guitar strings. If you got a high gain setup, basically if you have a lot of distortion going on, anything's going to get picked up. And that's the way I like things, because it's not really a matter of it's covering up mistakes. It's actually going to make your mistakes heard more, I would say, because you're picking up every little nuance that happens. So when you're playing with a lot of distortion, it's extra important to make sure you're muting things properly. When I was in high school and I was playing with one guy who was a bass player, you know, every now and then we'd kind of trade off. I'd play his bass, he'd play my acoustic, and he made the comment that, you know, I always prefer playing acoustics versus electric. I'm definitely paraphrasing here, but he said he prefers playing the acoustic or clean guitar versus the distorted guitar because he doesn't know how to mute the distortion. Like, he never figured it out. He had too much crap ringing out all the time. So when you're playing a clean guitar, if the open strings are ringing out along with the notes that you're trying to play, as long as the open strings are in key, it's not going to sound too bad. So anyway, enough about that. How in the heck do you mute these things? So when you are bending, you know, it's important that you push the strings up out of the way. So I always have students push the top three strings up. So the E, B, and G string, I always push up. So when I'm doing this, let's see, I am basically pushing the other strings up and out of the way here. So let's see if I can kind of get that in there. Hopefully you can see that their other string is sitting on top of my fingertip when I'm doing this. There we go. So on those three strings, I'm pushing the other ones, pushing the other ones up along with it. And what happens with a lot of guys is they'll end up digging their fingernails underneath the string. So hopefully you can see the string is now on top of my fingernails. So you're definitely going to have extra ringing when that happens. So it's important that when you bend a string, you have to kind of flatten your fingers a little bit. Not completely like that, you know, but you're going from this curve here with your fingers and then kind of pushing it up straight a little bit. So this way the tips of your fingers are facing the fretboard, going right towards it. And then they kind of rotate enough so they're pointing closer to more up towards the ceiling, I should say. So you're able to push those other strings up out of the way. So when you're pushing the E string, B string, and the G string up, you got to push those other strings out of the way. That's going to help with the muting process, so you're not grabbing extra strings and making a bunch of racket. Now on the bottom three strings, the D, A, and E, you don't have to worry about pushing the other strings out of the way or kind of like along with you the way that you do on these, because it's just the way your hand is positioned and the motion that's made. It's very easy to just have those other strings just move in the way they need to without being played once you let go of that string. So, I mean, if you're not doing the mute properly still, like I can hear some excess noise ringing out there. So the easy way to mute the strings when you're bending the low strings is you got to position your hand in such a way that the string or the fingers you're using to bend the string, like right now, these fingers are barely touching the A string. So this way, after I bend and release, I'm still barely touching that A string. So this way, it's being muted and it won't ring out. If I'm not touching it and I do this, hopefully you can hear a difference there. So no, I'm going to do like 3 no mutes and then 3 with a mute. So hopefully you can hear a difference there. So that's really the best thing to do when you're pulling, when you're pulling these strings down. Just make sure at least your index finger is barely touching the string right underneath your finger. So you're going to have to keep it somewhat on the tip, but flat enough to where it's muting that other string. Now the other ones, when you're pushing, like the top strings, you're going to have to do a bit of right hand muting as well. So it's important that you still do the same muting where you have like at least your index finger barely touching that string that's right next to it. So like if you're playing a G string, you want your index barely touching the B string. That's going to definitely help make sure that B string doesn't ring out when you don't want it to. But you're also going to do a lot of muting with the right hand. So I have my right hand, like this part right here, touching the strings, the lower strings, and I'm not using. So if I'm bending the B string, I'm basically keeping my palm resting on the E, A, D, and the G string, kind of. But the other thing I'm doing is, along with the index, let's say in this case I'm bending the B string, the index is barely touching the E string, it's also barely touching the G string. So like, your bend fingers, especially my index, is doing a lot of excess muting. Or not excess, extra muting. That's what I mean, extra muting. So this way it's touching like both of the strings that are right next to the one that you're bending. Even when I'm doing bending the E string here, I'm getting my index finger to touch a little bit of the B string. So in case my right hand doesn't mute that B string, I have a little bit of extra help with the left hand here. So hopefully those ideas on muting can help you clean up any gross sounding bends. Gross sounding bends because you got a bunch of excess noise ringing out. So it's a subtle process, and It's nothing, I can't remember if my teacher ever told me how to do that sort of thing. There's a lot of muting stuff that I think I just picked up naturally while playing with a lot of loud distortion. When you're playing with your amp cranked up, like in a band situation, and a lot of distortion, it's very easy to get a bunch of feedback. So I was kind of forced to learn how to mute everything the best I could so it didn't sound like a staticky, shrieky mess. So if you like what I had to say here about muting the strings while you bend, I'd appreciate you leaving a thumbs up. And if you have any questions about what the heck I talked about here, please let me know. I'm happy to further clarify if I need to. And thank you very much for watching.